These are the Dunbar Lunt books by Gordon Shirreffs, written between 1963 and 1968. Now, Gordon Shirreffs was best known for writing westerns, and he was a superb writer. But he was also a veteran of the Navy in World War II, and he occasionally wrote young adult books. And these 6 books follow the adventures of 2 young men, Bob Dunbar and Gary Lunt, as they serve on various craft in the Navy during the war. And they are just superb. They are written for young adults, so there are several concessions to that. Most people at that time, most adults would have smoked. There's no smoking in here in these books. And I don't want to shock anyone, but in real life, members of the U.S. Navy occasionally use a naughty word, but there's no swearing in these books. But other than that, these books are superb, and they present a very realistic and often very intense view of what it was like to be in the Navy during World War II. And they are just great wartime adventure stories. I first encountered them as a child when I read On Hostile Beaches from my public library, and I just loved it. And Bob and Gary in this book are serving on a PT boat, and PT boats are just naturally awesome. I love PT boats. So I love this book. As an adult, I could not remember the title or author, and I wanted to find it again. And I remembered some plot points, and I Googled all over the place trying to find it. And ironically, it turned out that I had read 2 different young adult PT boats books at that time in my life as a child. And I found this one, Torpedo Run on Iron Bottom Bay, by John Claggett. And I found a copy online and got it and read it, and I enjoyed it enormously. And I remembered several of the plot points from when I read it as a kid, but I also realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm conflating those 2 books together. There's another book out there. And with the help of a group called What Book Is This on Goodreads, I was able to figure out that the other PT boat book I read was On Hostile Beaches, and I acquired a copy, and I read it, and I loved it, and I realized at this point that it was part of a series. So I work in a library. I was able to use their interlibrary loan services to read the others from various libraries. The only one I owned, remember, was On Hostile Beaches. And these things are very rare, and when you find one for sale online, it's often very expensive. And I've never seen one in a used bookstore. I've never seen one in the wild. So I got married, and my wife turns out to be the most beautiful and wonderful wife in the world. For a birthday and then later a Christmas, she got me books 3 through 6. So now I owned all but the first one. And we found a copy in line it was $65. Good heavens. But once again, I have a wonderful wife who just said, let's splurge and get it so you can have the complete collection. So I contacted the seller. I offered $60, and he said, that's fine, and he even threw in the postage. And I got the first book, so now I own all 6. These books have never, ever been brought back into print. And that's a shame. There is a publisher, Wolfpack Publishing, that has been reprinting a lot of Gordon D. Shirreffs' books, his westerns, and several of his young adult books set during the Civil War and in the Old West. But it's been over a year now since the last time they published something by Shirreffs, and they never published these. So I don't know. These are still out there in out-of-print limbo. And if you can find one, snatch it up. These are wonderful books, and I hope that somebody brings them back into print one day because they really deserve to be better known than they are. The first book, The Cold Seas Beyond, was published in 1963, and in this one, Bob and Gary aren't quite old enough to join the Navy yet. The war's on, and they are working on a salvage boat in the Aleutian Islands. And they have a number of adventures. At one point, Bob and another character are on a damaged PT boat being towed by the salvage boat when the tow line comes loose, and they're lost on sea on a boat they can't maneuver. And they're spotted by an American fighter, and since they have no way of giving the proper recognition signals, they get strafed by the fighter. Later on, when Bob is back with the salvage boat, they do actually encounter some Japanese soldiers and have some trouble with that. So that's the Cold Seas Beyond 1963. The Hostile Beaches 1964 has them on a destroyer in the Solomon Islands. When that destroyer is damaged, they end up on shore on an island and are taken aboard as crewmen on a PT boat. This is just a wonderful book. At one point, they go barge bopping. That was in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese would try to reinforce Guadalcanal and other islands where fighting was going on by bringing in troops and supplies at night on barges. And these barges would be armed for their own protection with machine guns and sometimes small cannon. And there's a scene in here where the PT boat is pretty much dogfighting with a bunch of these barges. That's really epic. Towards the end of the book, Bob and Gary are helping load supplies bring supplies to a coast watcher on an island when trouble ensues and the PT boat has to pull out real quick and they are stuck on the island and they have some adventures there. They are recovered by and they're rescued by an American destroyer at the end. But at the beginning of the next book, they're washed off that destroyer during a storm and picked up by an American submarine. Now, over the course of the whole series, I do have to say that they are left on an island twice by whatever craft they're serving on, and they get washed overboard and picked up by a sub here. So Shirreffs was very concerned with being realistic. He does probably stretch a point in what happens in order to get Bob and Gary to serve on a variety of different craft during the war, and to have adventures on individual islands. They get left behind a lot. They get washed overboard a lot, and you concede that as part of what happens to them without being bothered. Sheriffs had to do something to get them onto various ships. They end up on a submarine, which is starting on a mission, and so they're not able to be put ashore. And they start helping out and learn how to be submariners, and they stay on the sub for most of the rest of the war, throughout the later books. And I'm not sure if this would happen in real life. In real life, if you got back from that mission and you'd been on the sub for some months and you've learned the job, would they still require you to go to submarine school to continue serving on a sub, or would they just say, well, you guys know what you're doing, you can stay? Would it be up to the sub captain, who was happy with Bob and Gary being crewmen because they were good at their jobs? And I don't know if Sheriffs was stretching a point here or not. I know generally to serve on a sub, you have to go to submarine school, graduate from that, and I apologize to any submariners out there if I'm misremembering that. I think you get a dolphin emblem to wear on your collar. And Bob and Gary never go to sub school. They just learn on the job. And maybe that would have worked out and they would have stayed on the sub if the captain was happy with them. But once again, if that's a little bit unrealistic, and I don't know if it is, it's not a big deal. It gets Bob and Gary where Gordon Shirreffs needs them to be to have the adventures he was putting them through. So the book after that, Torpedoes Away, this is 1966 we're up to, when this was published. A lot of the book is the sub they're on trying to find a German U-boat that has come into the Pacific and is causing a lot of trouble. Once again, another great naval adventure. Now, other than the Hostile Beaches, which I love because it involves PT boats and it's the one I nostalgically remember from childhood, the Bolo Battalion is possibly my favorite one. They are landing supplies for Filipino guerrillas in the Philippines, which at the time was still occupied by the Japanese. And once again, trouble ensues and the sub has to cut out. And so Bob and Gary and another crewman are stuck on the island and they join up with a Filipino guerrilla unit. And they serve with them for a while. And just as an example of how good these books are, here's page 112. They've just attacked a Japanese camp and killed most of the Japanese, but about 50 of the Japanese ran into the jungle, where a character says the jungle should take care of them all within a few days. Bob shivered a little. He looked at the encroaching green wall of the jungle beyond the weedy field. In that green, wet, mildewed tangle, some of the Japanese would die slowly of disease, while others might die swiftly and horribly. The first step was to get lost, and probably they were still running deep into what they thought was safety from the bamboo warriors. It might have been better for them to return and die swiftly and cleanly by gunfire. Everything looked alike in the jungle. One trail was the same as another. A man could die 100 yards from a well-traveled road or river and never know it. Fear would drive them on. Exhaustion would slow them down. The jungle would move in for the kill. No question that Shirreffs was a great writer and could vividly make his point sometimes. Sherlock, I'm sure you would agree with that, right? I am trying to get Sherlock to do more reading during the day when Angela and I are at work. And I just think, based on his poor performance of the written essays I give him at night, I just think he's not doing the reading at all. I'm very disappointed in him. Anyway, moving on to the last one, we have The Killer Sea, published in 1968. And this takes place just after the war. Bob and Gary are civilians again, once again, working on a salvage boat in the Aleutians. And they run into some unsurrendered Japanese who don't want to accept that the war is over and have an adventure with that. So, the Bob Dunbar, Gary Lunt books by Gordon D. Shirreffs. I wish I could say you could just go to Amazon or another bookstore and order them, but they are out of print. They are very rare. I still hold hopes that Wolfpack Publishing or somebody will bring them back into print someday, because they need to be better remembered than they are. They are superb books. You agree, right, Sherlock? There'll be an essay on this tonight. You need to study. You need to read. But I love that I own a set of them. And I love that I have a wonderful best wife ever who didn't mind, who either got me as gifts or didn't mind my splurging a little to complete the collection. I actually live in fear that Angela will one day realize she's far too good for me and kick me out of the house. So that's my life. Fear that my wife will realize she's too good for me and kick me out of the house, and perpetual disappointment that my dog's not doing his assigned reading and completing the essays that I give him. But that's life, isn't it? And at least I own these books as some measure of comfort. So, Gordon D. Shirreffs, read anything you can find by him. His Westerns are excellent. He's just a great writer. But if you ever run across any of these books, get them. You will not regret it.